In this video, we're going to demonstrate the concepts behind the client-side data cache. So the client-side data cache is a new object in the UX component that allows you to fetch data from the server and keep it on the browser side. And then in particular, it's particularly useful for disconnected applications because the data that you fetch can be persisted either to the local storage, or in the case of a PhoneGap application, to the file system, which means that the data will then be available to you once you are offline. So let's start out by looking at the data cache editor. So we'll go here to the menu and we'll choose the client-side data cache editor. So this brings up the editor, and you can see that we currently already have 4 items defined. So you can add as many items as you want to the data cache editor, and each item that you add basically needs to retrieve data in JSON format. So you can go to edit, let's for example edit customers, and we can see that customers is based on a SQL query that goes against the Northwind database, and it retrieves all records from the customer table. So in addition to SQL queries, you can have nested SQL queries. And nested SQL queries are designed for queries that need to return complex JSON documents. So for example, if you want to return customers and then all orders for each selected customer, and then for each order you want the nested order details, you can use a nested SQL query. Static data is just what it says. You can just type in any list of static JSON data, and then XBasic is any XBasic function that you want to call that returns data in JSON format. So for each data item that you define, you can specify whether the data should be fetched at the time the UX component is rendered, or delayed until you've explicitly executed a refresh command. And if you turn on the delay query till refresh, then you have the ability to persist the data on the device, on the mobile device, or in memory. And then when you persist, you can choose to persist to local storage, file system, which means that you're running under PhoneGap and you want to store the data in the file system, or file system preferred, which means if you're running under PhoneGap, then use the file system, otherwise fall back to local storage. So basically you can see that for all of these items here, we've turned on delay render, and we've said persist to file system preferred. So let's go ahead now and run this component in the browser, and I'll point out that I've got a list over here, and this list is basically going to show the data that we read out of the data cache. So let's go ahead now to run this in the browser, and I'm going to start out by and I've turned on Firebug here so we can see Ajax callbacks taking place. So I'm going to go here and delete local storage, so there's nothing in local storage right now. And then I'm going to press this button to read customers. So when I read customers, since this was set as a delay read, you can see there's my Ajax callback to the server. So, and then the server responds with the data over here. So there's the data that we responded with. And then you can see we just populated this list control with the data that we read from the data cache. So if we go now and we go read orders, you can see now we've gone and read orders. Now we can go and read order details. We can read from our XBasic data item. And now if we now go back and read customers, you'll see there's no Ajax callback anymore because the data was persisted to local storage. So let's now pause and pick it up in the next video where we'll continue this discussion. So we're continuing now discussing how the client-side data cache works. And you can see that we've got a list over here, and this list is actually configured very simply. So the list control basically just says it's got static data with a column called dummy, and there's no actual data in the list at all. And then the list itself just has dummy over there. And then we've also turned on list virtualization because in some cases we're going to be populating this list with with a lot of data. So then let's take a look here at what happened when I press the read customers button. So let's go now to the click event here, and we can see that what we're doing on this click event here is a client-side action. So this is a new action in Action JavaScript called client-side data cache actions, and if we edit it, we can see that the action that we're doing is a read data action. So this is the action that you call to read a data item out of the client-side data cache, and then we specify which item we want to read. And there are the 4 items that we've defined. Now, reading an item out of the data cache is done asynchronously, because if you haven't yet fetched the data from the server, then when you read the data, we'll first make an AJAX callback and then wait till the AJAX callback completes, and then once that completes, then we'll call into the onSuccess function. So this is the function that gets called once the data has been read from this customer data item. And if we go look at the code here, you can see that we're just calling a method of the UX component called SetListColumnsPopulate. So this is a new method of the list that allows you to dynamically populate a list with data and also set the columns in the list based on the data. So this is going to basically, when we read the data from the customer data item, we're going to basically populate the list with the columns in the customer data item. When we read from orders, then we'll populate the list columns with the columns in the order data. And what we've said over here is only show the first 5 columns, and we did that because if you recall, the data item was select star from customers, and that's going to have quite a lot of columns in it. So this is how we basically dynamically populate the list with the data that we've read. So if we go back now and we run this, we'll see that we'll go here, and so now if we go there and say read customers, there's no callback to the server at this point. Basically the data is just being read out of local storage. And if we go here and we watch this in Firebug, we'll see that when we press this button, there's no callback. But if I press the button here, if I go, let's go through all of these, and you'll see there's no callbacks. We're just reading out of local storage right now. But then if we go click this button here to delete everything in local storage, and then I go press read orders, now you see we have an AJAX callback. If I go now to customers, again there's an AJAX callback. So in this case, we're basically showing the component running in a browser, and so all of the data is being persisted to local storage. But it can just as easily work for in PhoneGap applications to persist to the file system, and that's where you get a big benefit, because when you're persisting to the file system, you can now load a large amount of data onto your device, so that it'll be available to you when you go offline. And by using the file system and not local storage, you can store much more data to have available to you offline than you would if you just relied on local storage. So now let's continue in the next video, where we demonstrate this component running as a PhoneGap application. So before we actually run this component in PhoneGap on a real device, let's just take a look at a few of the other properties that are important. So I'm going to go back to the data cache editor here, and then on other settings you can see that there are some additional properties here. And what we have over here is the ability to display progress while the data is being downloaded from the server to the mobile device before it gets stored in the file system. So if you've got a lot of data in your client-side data cache, several megabytes, maybe 20 or 30 megabytes, it's going to take a fair amount of time to download the data to the device. So 20 megabytes might take say 20 seconds or something like that, depending on the speed of your connection. So you'd like to display progress to the user while the data is being downloaded. So this allows you to display progress, and we've said that we'd like the progress to be displayed in placeholder 1. So you can see we've got placeholder 1 is one of the controls on our component. Then in addition, let's say that there's a lot of items in your client-side data cache, and so when you make a callback to the server to go and refresh all the data in the cache, it could take quite some time for the server to actually execute all the queries to generate the JSON data that needs to be downloaded to the device. So typically what you'll do is when the user presses a button to go and refresh the data, you'll display a wait dialog telling the user that the server is busy. And then when the server has finished creating all of the JSON files that need to be downloaded to the device, it'll send a response back to the mobile device saying, I've got the files, you can start downloading them. So at that point the progress bar will kick in and the user will now see what's going on. But when using this event here, before file download begins, you can go here and you can hide the wait message. So you can display a wait message when the user, for example, you can see here in this button, which is refresh all, we're going to use action JavaScript over here to make a callback to the server and refresh all of the items in our data cache. But before we do that, we're going to display a wait message. So here's our wait message that's being displayed, and then after this callback completes and the files start downloading to the device, we'll hide the wait message and then the progress bar will kick in. So in addition, we've also basically got two buttons here to show the files that are currently stored on the device. So if we go here and look in action JavaScript, we see we're using the PhoneGap file system action here, and the files for the data cache are always loaded into a directory called __ AA data cache. And so what we're going to do over here is, after we read all the files in the directory, we're just going to basically create an array that contains the display name of each file, and then set the inner HTML of a div called div1 so we can see what those files are. So basically here's our div over there, which contains the ID of div1, and then so we can see so we can delete the files from the cache as well. You can see we have another button over here called delete directory, and what that button does is just simply call the PhoneGap file system actions, and we're going to just go here and remove directory, and we're going to remove that directory. So now with that background information in hand, let's switch over and run this component in PhoneGap. So I'm going to pause now and then pick it up in the next video where we show this component actually running on an iPad. So we're continuing now with our discussion about the client-side data cache, and we're now running this component on an iPad. And so I'm going to start out by basically clicking this button here called Show Directory to show that currently there are no files on the iPad. So now I'm going to go and click on the Read Customer button over here. So what's going to happen now is a callback is going to be made to the Alpha server, and then on the server we'll do the query, get this JSON data, and then send a message back to the iPad saying you can now download the file. And if we go look now in, if we press this button here, Show Directory, we'll see that we have a file now in this folder called __ data cache called customer.json. So this is now the persisted data. So if I no longer had a connection and I click this button to read customers, the data will now be read out of the file system, and we can see that we'll populate this list over here. So now if I go and press the Read Orders button, you'll see also, and watch carefully here, you'll see a progress bar coming up, going up very briefly. So you can see now we've got our orders over there, and if we say Show Directory, we'll see now we have another file in the file system called orders.js. If we now go and read, say, order details, you see this is a slightly bigger file, so it took a little bit longer to download the file, but still it wasn't bad at all. And if we go now and say show directory, you'll see now we have that third file over there. So now let's go and delete all the files. So we'll just go there and click this button, delete directory. And so now if I basically say show directory, there's no files in the directory there at all. And now I'm going to press this button called refresh all. So this is going to make a call back to the server and go get the data for all of the data items. So you'll see now that we have our little wait dialog coming up. Then once the server has completed all of the queries, it sends back the message saying you can now fetch the files, and then the progress meter, the progress dialog shows. And now if I say show directory, you can see here we have a file in the directory for each data item. So we've basically now got all of our data offline. But as I mentioned previously, you can store large amounts of data in the file system. And so what we're going to do now is actually add some items to the client-side data cache that have a large number of records in them. So I'm going to go back now to the builder over here. So let's actually I'll pause now and pick this up in the next video where we show how we can add some large items into the data cache. So we're continuing now with a discussion of how you can add a large amount of data into the client-side data cache. So let's go back now and edit our data cache. So we'll go over here, and now let's add a new item. So I'm going to basically do a query against the sample SQL Server database called AdventureWorks. And the reason I chose AdventureWorks is that it's a database that a lot of people are familiar with, but it's got quite a large number of records in it. So I'm going to go here and say AdventureWorks person, and we'll go over now and we'll go here and select a SQL query, and then we'll go over to connection string, and so there's my SQL Server AdventureWorks connection, and then we'll go here and we'll choose the person. Let's go here and choose the, say, I think there's a person table. This has got a large number of records in it, and we'll choose a whole number of fields from this. I guess that should be enough over here. So we've chosen a bunch of fields, and now let's go here and say delay until explicit refresh, and we'll also go here and save on device, and we'll keep this as file system preferred. Now I don't know if I mentioned previously, but you can also specify a maximum payload size. So right now this is -1, which means that there's no limit to this. We're not going to check how much data is returned by the query, but if you specify say 2 or 3 megabytes over here, this is specified in bytes, you can prevent the user by, you can set a limit here so that the user is prevented from entering a query that returns too much data, because obviously there's, even when you're going to the file system, you do want to limit the amount of data that can be brought down. So this allows you to specify limits on the amount of data that's going to get brought down, and then if you specify a value that's greater than 0 here, you'll see that you also get a JavaScript event that fires, which is payload size exceeded, and that's going to let you put up a JavaScript message to the user saying that the query that they entered wasn't sufficiently restrictive. Please enter, another query. So we'll go back there and just leave that at -1. So now we have our new query that's going to get data from the person table. And then let's go and add another button over here to read that data item. So let's just go there and duplicate this button and then edit it. So this will change the title here to AdventureWorks. And then we'll go over here and edit this action. So we'll change this now to AdventureWorks person. And then the final thing that we're going to do is to sort of get some sense of how much data we're actually downloading. let's go here to this client-side event, and you can see here in the before download begins, inside this event handler you can actually reference the file size of the amount of data that you're about to download. So I'm going to go here and say alert about to download, and then put in this arguments of 0 total file size. So let's go there now and put this in, and now we're ready to go back to our PhoneGap application and run this to see how it performs when you're downloading a larger amount of data. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now, and we've added a large data item from the sample AdventureWorks table into our data cache, and we're going to start off now and just see how the performance is when we download a larger amount of data. So let's start out by deleting the directory so that there's nothing in the directory. So there's you can see now there's no files in the directory. And now I'm going to go ahead now and click this refresh all button, which will refresh all of these data items, including the one from AdventureWorks. So I'll go there now and tap on the refresh all button. So you can see now there's the AJAX callback taking place to the server, and it takes a little longer now to produce the files on the server because the server now had to query all the data from AdventureWorks, and we put this message into our before download begins to show us how much data we're about to download. So basically we're about to download 6.7 megabytes of data now, and when I tap the OK button, the download will actually start and you'll see the progress there. So I'm going to click the OK button now. Now you can see there's the progress bar. So that's how long it took to download 6 megabytes of data to the iPad. And now when I tap on the read AdventureWorks, we're going to be reading, if I go there and show directory, we're going to be reading the data from this AdventureWorks person.json file that's in the file system right now and populating this list with that data. So I'm going to go ahead now and press the button, and you can see that what happened now is the list got populated, and this is telling me here that there were 19,972 rows in the table. So that's how long it took basically to read the data out of the file system and then populate this this list. So now I can go say to customers and get my customers. There's my orders, there's my order details, there's my XBasic, etc. So I've now got a lot of data that's sitting there in the file system on the device, all available to me while I'm disconnected. So the size of the data cache that can be persisted in the file system in PhoneGap is limited only by the amount of storage that you have on the device. So it is possible to store a large amount of data that, so that you can have this data available to you while you're disconnected. So the final thing that I want to point out is that when you read the data out of the data cache, when I click this button over here, I'm basically reading all of the data that was in the cache, all 19,000 rows. But it is possible to specify a filter and an order expression so that when you read the data, you only read the data of interest. So if I go back to the builder in Alpha Anywhere over here, and I look at let's go take a look at the code for this button, this Action JavaScript button over here. You can see that in addition to specifying what data item to read, you can also specify a filter and an order so that the data that is read from the data cache is first filtered and then sorted. So what we've shown in this video is how the data cache can be used to bring data from the server and make the data available to you when the UX component is running, and then how this data can then also be persisted either in local storage or in the file system when you're running as a PhoneGap application. Thanks very much for watching.